as we come on the air, former Penn State coach Jerry Sandusky has been sentenced to prison for the rest of his life. He is 68, and today he was sentenced to at least 30 years behind bars, the price for sexually abusing children. And today in the courtroom, he defiantly stood face to face with some of his victims who were just 10 feet away.
If you love this podcast, I'm sure you're looking for other great true crime podcasts to listen to. Wondery, the network behind this show, has other podcasts for you, especially if you love the way we tell stories here on Real Crime Profile. Great shows like Best Case, Worst Case, Locked Up Abroad, and Hollywood in Crime. All of them are amazing storytellers that you're going to love. So if you're looking for more variation in your podcast like true crime, entertainment, or audio dramas, they're all available from Wondery. Just head to apple.co/Wondery. That's apple.co/Wondery. Or if you're an Android user, head to Wondery.fm.
His wife Dottie in court for support, Sandusky complained about the verdict and in a defiant but trembling voice proclaimed innocence. Quote, "I feel a need to talk. I didn't do these alleged disgusting acts." A more emotional echo of what we heard him say in a public statement released to the Penn State radio station.
They can treat me as a monster, but they can't take away my heart.
But in court, Sandusky would not have the last word. 3 of his 10 victims confronted him face to face. Victim 5, "I'm haunted by his naked body." Victim 6, "Kids you promised to help, you victimized." And Victim 4, "You were supposed to be a role model. Instead, you decided to attack us."
Hello and welcome to Real Crime Profiles. I'm Clementi, retired FBI profiler, former New York City prosecutor, and writer-producer on CBS's Criminal Minds. And with me today in the studio is
Lisa Zambetti. I am the casting director for CBS's Criminal Minds, where I cast all kinds of psychopaths and victims and everything in between. And I have a real interest in real crime and the minds that solve those crimes.
And Laura is still on the other side of the pond, doing amazing things with laws pertaining to coercive control and stalking. And thank you for doing all that, Laura and Paladin. So today, Lisa wanted to talk to me.
That's right. I want everybody to know that we are both smiling. Jim has just ordered a sandwich, so he'll be eating soon. We've just had a great session with another guest, but I wanted to talk to Jim about
The Sandusky case,
because we're going to be having, should we say who our
Yeah,
guest
sure.
is going to be? Okay, go ahead.
We're going to have a very special guest who we think would be incredibly informative about the Sandusky case in general, but also about the recent movie released on HBO called Paterno. And our guest will be Scott Paterno, the son of Joe Paterno. Scott is an attorney, and he is very well versed in not only the case of Jerry Sandusky, but also the life of his father, his late father, Joe Paterno. So we thought it would be an amazing opportunity to get insights from Scott, who you'll see depicted in the movie, but also the fact that Scott lived with Joe his entire life and can tell us a lot about what was real and what was not in that movie.
Right. So Jim and I both just watched the HBO movie Paterno, so you have some time to go watch it. Starring Al Pacino. I'm a thumbs up on this performance, and I got to say,
I agree.
I've been thumbs down on him recently. Sorry, Mr. Pacino, I do want to work with you someday, but anyway, his performance is so nuanced.
Right, and I did work with Pacino recently, and that was an amazing experience, but I thought that I was very much taken in by his performance. I thought it was subtle in a lot of ways.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he had me. He
disappeared completely. And I had no hope that he would ever.
I know.
I thought he was going to scream his way through this like any given Sunday.
I know, but Al disappeared, and what we saw was Joe Paterno, which is pretty amazing. And I'm really eager to find out from Scott Paterno when we have him on what he thought about the performance of Al Pacino.
But today's episode, I wanted to talk to Jim because I know many of our listeners aren't familiar with the Sandusky case. And so I wanted to kind of explain what that was and talk about that. And there's a lot of controversy about Joe Paterno that I I didn't want to bring up too much in front of his son because I wanted to be able to talk very frankly about it.
But you realize that his son will be listening to this.
I know, but he's not going to be like in front of me. Okay, you know what I mean.
I know. I just want you to know. I mean, but Scott is absolutely capable of hearing and listening and responding to anything because he's been thrown in the firestorm before, and certainly this movie has brought up and rehashed a lot of things that were in the past that he went through.
Right, but I want to just do a primer on the case so we don't have to spend time with that, Scott. And one thing I just want to tell you, Jim, that you may not know, but I trust you with my life.
I trust you with my kids' lives.
I respect and appreciate your point of view. And I know you're going to have to take me through something because I'm on the ledge a bit, and you're going to talk me through it, and we're going to be okay.
Yeah, and look, and I get it. And there are a lot of people out there who love Joe Paterno, and there's a lot of people out there who love to hate Joe Paterno. Mm-hmm. But in full disclosure, let me go back and tell you how I got involved in this case. So some of my listeners may or may not know that about 8 years ago, I had a major heart attack. I actually went into cardiac arrest as well, and I was recovering from that when I was asked by a former colleague of mine whether I wanted to get involved in the Louis Freeh investigation into Jerry Sandusky's crimes related to the time when he worked at Penn State.
Let's talk about who Louis Freeh is.
Louis Freeh is the former director of the FBI, and he has retired, and then he has a law firm, and he's done sort of really, major investigations in a lot of different areas, and, also works as a lawyer, I suppose.
So at the time, the situation we're going to talk about had escalated to the level that the FBI...
Yeah, no, the FBI didn't get involved. What got involved was, what happened was Penn State University hired Louis Freeh's law firm to do an internal investigation of what happened at Penn State, to include what happened with administrators and with the football program, with Paterno, with Sandusky, because there were allegations that Sandusky had brought children into Penn State facilities and sexually assaulted them there. I was asked to become part of this investigation, as I know Ken Lanning was, my mentor. Ken and I, Ken first, and then I followed in his footsteps as experts in the field of child sexual victimization. Ken is a prolific writer in this area and an incredibly accomplished investigator, and he's got an amazing mind for detail. He can remember things in detail. And I always tell people, if you give Ken a call and you want to have a chat about something, set aside a minimum of 2 hours, because Ken has so much information, and it's so at the ready that he can tell you everything you ever wanted to know about any particular subject if it's in his bailiwick. So I was asked again to see if I wanted to be part of the Louis Freeh investigation, and I turned it down because they wanted a commitment of 6 months living away, and I had just recently gone through a heart attack and was, probably just finished rehab, and I was, going through some issues with my heart, and I wanted to be close to my cardiologist, and I really didn't feel like it was a smart health move to go there. I know Ken had a similar issue. He was asked to be part of it because of family issues. He could not go, but he went and trained the investigators. He did, several hours of training for them right at the beginning of the investigation. So the investigation went on, and I pretty much forgot about that part. Eventually, there was a report that was published by Louis Freeh. There was a press conference. They made some findings with respect to Sandusky, with respect to Penn State, with respect to the football program, and I basically took it at face value. I know that one of the professionals that worked for the organization called Stop It Now asked me to reach out to Louis Freeh to thank him for doing that, and I did. I reached out to him and said, thank you on behalf of this organization. And in fact, if anybody's read my my report that I ended up writing on this case, you'll see that I do call out that I respect Louis Freeh, and he was an incredibly good leader in my mind, and he was incredibly good to me as an FBI agent. Fast forward a little bit, and I get a call from a lawyer from a law firm from Washington, D.C., somebody I did not know, and they said, look, we've been given your name. We need an expert in the field of child sexual victimization, and we would like to retain you on a case. And I said, well, sorry, but I can give you referrals to other people, but given my health situation, I'm really not taking on any new cases at this point. And I'm just focusing on my writing. And so they said, all right. And I gave them names of a couple other people that they might want to talk to. And a couple weeks later, they called me back. This lawyer called me back and said, well, we'd really like you to reconsider. And I said, look, I'm really not interested. I respect Louis Freeh. And they called me back. They said the case was the Sandusky case. And they were a law firm that represented the Paterno family. And because Joe Paterno had passed away, the family had retained this counsel, and they wanted to get an expert's review of the Louis Freeh report. And I told him, I respect Louis Freeh. I'm really not interested. And he said, well, we'd really like you to reconsider. And so I said, all right, I'll think about it. And what I did was I went online. And I started, because I knew nothing about Joe Paterno. I mean, I've heard his name, he's Italian, he's a football coach.
Total personality,
Yeah.
huge figure. Yes.
Yeah, well, I didn't know any of that. I don't follow college football. I don't follow football in general. I don't find it really exciting to watch 12 minutes of action over the course of 3 hours. So I don't even watch World, what is it called?
Series?
No, not the World Series, the Super Bowl. See?
Okay.
See? I don't even
All
watch
those plots.
I don't even watch the Super Bowl. Okay, that's how disinterested I am in American football. It's cold out. You don't go to the games. I like baseball because you can go during the summer, right? It's nice and warm out. I don't like winter sports.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
I know that. I know you're always cold. Anyway.
I am. All right, so here we go. I am getting on the internet, and I just started reading some articles to try to find out who this Joe Paterno was, something about his family. And I read an article that said that Joe Paterno was a coach at Penn State. I think he was head coach for 46 years or something like that. And he was there for longer than that. But that he was given a letter at 10:30 at night, told to make a call. He called somebody on the board of trustees of Penn State, and they said, you're fired effective immediately. And his wife said, give me the phone. She takes the phone from him. She hits redial, and she calls back and says, after 61 years, he deserved better. And then she hangs up the phone. And I said, I like that lady. So that was the first thing. And the second thing I read was that Joe, he was getting, advanced in his years, and he kept a legal pad on his night table. And on that legal pad, he would keep notes because he was getting forgetful. Shortly after all this happened, he ended up going to the hospital, and he ended up not coming home. He ended up dying of cancer. He had undiagnosed cancer for a period of time, and he passed away 2.5 months after this whole incident broke and after he got fired. So on that legal pad, the last thing he had written was, I hope that as a result of this case, people learn more about this kind of thing so it doesn't happen to any more kids. And I'm paraphrasing that, but it's something to that effect. And to me, that was like, wow, for that to be the man's final statement. All right, I'll at least look into it to see what's going on under the surface here. So I called back to the lawyer and I said, okay, listen, I'll at least look into this. And they said, look, all we want you to do is read the Freeh report cover to cover. And if you think that the claims that are made in the executive summary at the beginning are supported by evidence in the rest of the report, then that's fine. And I said, all right, I'll do that with one caveat. if I agree with what he says, I'm going to be just as vocal as if I disagree. And I said, that's the only way I'll do this. No, it's not, of course, because a lot of times when law firms hire you as an expert, they give you an NDA and you're not allowed to talk about it. And I said, I will not do it. So just know that that's the only parameters under which I will do this. And they said, absolutely, no problem. And that kind of also, that was the third thing that kind of stuck in my mind. Okay, so I read the Freeh.
How long did it take you to read it?
It's like 247 pages. And I spent a few hours, because it's a lot of details. And so actually 3 or 4 hours I went through it because there was a lot of flipping back and forth too. But it was really interesting. But at the same time, there's so many details. When I got to the end, I was like, wait a minute, something's missing. So I reread it again. So I spent literally the entire day that day reading the report twice. And as I started reading it the second time, I started writing down notes about what I thought was missing. Wait a minute, this claim was made in the executive summary, but there's no evidence of it. And the other thing that was glaring to me was that this is a case of a long-term, preferential child sex offender who groomed his victims incredibly well. I mean, I put him in the top 1% of groomers in this country. He's an acquaintance offender, somebody who was known to all of his victims. He was a pillar of the community. He was a nice guy. Everybody loved him.
Jim's talking about Jerry Sandusky, not
Right.
Joe Paterno.
Well,
yeah, but some people don't know that yet.
Okay. And he was an assistant coach at Penn State football for a number of years, decades, and he started this organization called The Second Mile to help underprivileged children. He helped literally hundreds of thousands of kids over the years. He raised tens of millions of dollars for those kids. And yet the word grooming appears one time, very late in Freeh's report. And there's nothing about acquaintance offenders. There's nothing about grooming tactics. There's nothing about how these kinds of nice guy, acquaintance offenders who are pillars of the community, how they pull the wool over people's eyes and how they fake out the community, mislead people, and get access and authority and control over kids because other people trust them. There was nothing about that at all in this entire 200-plus page report. And instead, what I saw was evidence that they looked at Jerry Sandusky as if he was a stranger danger offender, somebody that lurks behind trees and he's creepy and everybody sees him and gets creeped out and runs away. But he wasn't like that at all. And it really, to me, when I looked at this, after the second time, I was convinced that this report that Louis Freeh wrote set us back 30 or 40 years in terms of what we know in law enforcement about child sexual victimization, child sex offenders, compliant victimization, grooming, all of these incredibly important concepts that were absolutely missing from this investigation and this report. So I told the lawyers, I'm going to take this case and I'm going to go through this report again and again and again and pull out all the details, and I'll write them a report. And they were like, great. So I started, and I spent weeks going through in painstaking detail every single line in that report. And as I was doing it, I literally had my computer out and I was writing free form. I was just writing my thoughts, and sometimes I would go off on tangents, and sometimes I would make statements that I thought I would get to this, but it's not here in the report. But I know, because I've read it a bunch of times before, that this is related to another point, and so I was writing free form. By the time I had 200 pages. I mean, it was like I had written a book, basically. I did not expect to do that, but I had 200 pages, but a lot of it was rambling and a lot of it was repetitious because the subjects would come up over and over again. So I literally, one of the lawyers called me up and said, look, we've been waiting, what are you doing? Do you have anything, even preliminary for us? And I said, well, I just have my thoughts, rambling on a page. I can send you that, but please don't give it to anybody because, literally it's not organized in any way, shape, or form. It's literally my sort of stream of thought, stream of consciousness thoughts on this report. And I sent it to them, and it was sort of the the young ground level attorney that I was talking to, and that I sent it to, just to show them that I am doing stuff, and I've spent a lot of hours in the last 2 weeks doing this, or 2 or 3 weeks. I can't remember how long it had been. And so when the next day came, I got a call not from him, but from his boss, the attorney that had originally called me. And he said, "Jim, I read your work. Oh my God, we had no idea. This is a complete game changer." And I said, "First of all, he was not supposed to send it to you. And I'm so embarrassed, because literally that was just stream of consciousness." But he said, "Can you fly to DC? We need to talk to you right away." And I was like, "Yeah, I mean," so I did. I flew out there, and they said, "We have all this, but tell us exactly what you think of this." And I literally said to him, "I think this report, I'm so upset, because I think this report set us back 30 years at least, because 30 years ago, Ken Lanning changed the game in the field and took us away from stranger danger and talked to us about the most prevalent and persistent and prolific threat against our children is not strangers, but people that we know and love and trust. And the fact is that they use grooming, which is basically methodologies of getting access, authority, and control over children so that for sexual purposes. And what they do in grooming is they groom not only the child, but parents and guardians and the community in general. So all these concepts now are in the zeitgeist, but back then they weren't. And unfortunately, in Louis Freeh's report, they were completely absent. And again, the word grooming was used one time, and all it said was, and Jerry used his access to the Penn State facilities to groom kids. But they completely lost track of that throughout the entire report. But that was very, very upsetting to me, because I had devoted my career, and Ken Lanning before me has devoted his career, and many other people like Jennifer Aiken and Kathy Canning and Jim Beasley, we have all dedicated our careers towards getting the word out there about grooming and compliant victimization and the results of grooming and nice guy acquaintance offenders, nice guy, nice gal acquaintance offenders, and pillar of the community offenders. All these concepts that people don't realize, they're the real danger to their children. So I took on this case. I sat down with these lawyers. I went through what I thought were the major points in terms of what kind of offender Sandusky was, which is a pillar of the community, nice guy, acquaintance offender who is a preferential offender. And I told him a number of things that I knew about him as a result of this. And I started digging into, I read anything I could on this subject. And there was so much of what I had predicted just based on the type of offender he was. So I went back and I went through and I reorganized my report, and I made it, flow according to how I wanted to build my argument in this case, and ended up publishing, I think, a 97-page or 99-page report, which you can see on www.paterno.com. There's a couple of other experts that they also hired. Dr. Fred Berlin, who's a very respected sex offender treatment provider. I have testified against a number of times in cases, but he's a lifelong professional friend of mine. And personal friend of mine. What a wonderful guy, brilliant guy too. And he really wants to do whatever he can to prevent these offenders from offending again. So he does treat child sex offenders and other sex offenders. And the other expert that they hired was Dick Thornburg, who is an attorney, and he's the former governor of Pennsylvania. And he and Dr. Berlin and I didn't know about each other. We all reviewed Freeh's report, and we all did independent reports, and we all came out to the same conclusions. I think their reports were much more brief. I think the longest one was like 10 pages, but I went into it in much greater detail because that was my mission. My mission was to use this to educate people around the world about nice guy acquaintance offenders, pillar of the community offenders, what grooming is, how it affects children, how it affects victims, how it affects adults and guardians and members of the community. And so because of all of that, my report turned out to be, almost 100 pages. But the last 8 or 9 pages of it is sort of a takeaway. It's a teaching section about all those topics: nice guy acquaintance offenders, grooming, compliant victimization. And so you can use that to help educate yourself and hopefully all the people around you to help better protect children. Because the most prolific and the most common offenders against children are people they know and love and trust.
I just couldn't believe what was happening.
Travis Weaver says he stayed in the Sandusky home in State College more than 100 times when he was 10 or 11, in the basement and sometimes in a second-floor guest room. He says Jerry Sandusky would come down and eventually sexually assault him. He told NBC's Kate Snow the same thing happened in the Penn State locker room.
He'd rub my backside. Sometimes he'd roll over on top of me and blow on my stomach and rub my genitals. And then it progressed into oral sex.
I have so many things to ask you. I just don't know what order to ask. So
Okay.
let me just...
Go for it.
Okay. I want to talk about the enormity of what Sandusky did for our listeners.
Sure.
So we should talk about where is Pennsylvania and what, just set that stage. And,
Okay, Pennsylvania is in the middle of the East Coast and Happy Valley or College. Is it College Park, Pennsylvania? I think it's College Park, Pennsylvania is where Penn State is located. And it's basically at the very western end of a very long state. So it's a long drive from New York City, let me put it that way, and a long drive from Philadelphia even. But basically, Penn State is middle America, and
a lot of working class people.
Yes. And during the time that Joe Paterno was the coach, Penn State went from a pretty obscure school to a football powerhouse. They built a stadium, I think that 70 or 90,000 people were in. I mean, a huge, massive thing. And it's a really, really big thing, Penn State football. So the fact that one of its assistant coaches, somebody who seemed to be in line to maybe one day take over as head coach, was actually sexually victimizing children, that is a major thing. So
Jerry Sandusky was an assistant football coach at Penn State, and he worked there for,
I don't know, 20 or 30 years.
Yeah. And to all appearances, as you said before, he was this jocular guy, kind of a goofy Gus, big hangdog. And I mean, the things I've read, Paterno kind of didn't like him because he was
he didn't.
freaking...
Well, here's the thing. And Sue Paterno, who I later would meet, told me that she kind of feels guilty about it because when Jerry was applying for the job, Joe did not want to hire him as an assistant coach because he thought he was too touchy-feely and he thought he was too goofy, just kind of a wimp. And Joe liked to drive his athletes really hard. And his wife, Sue, said, hey, maybe that's what you need to counterbalance you. You're so tough on these guys. And Joe would build a reputation for not only the football team, but for academics for the football team. So what he did was he demanded the highest standards in terms of academics from his football players. He graduated more football players than any other school. His percentage of graduation was for his athletes was like 85%, as opposed to many other athletic schools. They didn't really get a degree, but in Penn State, they got a degree. They had to pass all their classes. They had to do very well. And that's a wonderful thing because he cared about men, young men behind the football team, not just the fact that he wanted to win. Right. So that was his legacy.
Right, for sure. And
Until
right. So Jerry Sandusky starts, who knows how long he was.
Well, that's what I want to bring up. When I reviewed his case, I said, I believe, like most preferential child sex offenders, he discovered his propensity towards being sexually attracted to children in his late teens and most likely started offending shortly thereafter. It turns out he grew up in a family which his father turned their home into a foster home. And he basically had a bunch of kids, and it became sort of a group home eventually. So they had a lot of kids. I believe Jerry Sandusky more than likely started offending in that group home. I believe he had access to kids then. I believe that gave him sort of a kickoff to his offending career. And I believe that's why he was so adept at it by the time he got to Penn State. Now, Penn State, their students are adults. But Jerry Sandusky started a charity so that he would get access to children. I believe that's absolutely the reason why he did it, because he actually does, in fact, love children, but he also falls in love with children.
And he was a foster parent too. He and his wife
they fostered 24 kids. They adopted 6 kids. So 30 times the government and the experts that evaluate people, whether they're good or bad foster or adoptive parents, 30 times they granted Jerry access to another kid and another kid and another kid. Why did they do it? Because his persona was such, as you said, he's very affable, nice guy, and everybody believed that he literally loved kids, wanted to take care of kids, help kids, and that's the reason why he was doing it.
So what I want to talk about now is the gradual outing of Sandusky as the fetid piece of human garbage that he is.
Well, yeah, and let me just distinguish that. His behavior behind closed doors was that. But everybody still thought, up until the time he got arrested, and many people still believe, there are people that still believe that he could not have done this because he was such a nice guy. So I just don't want to mislead people. It is not. These offenders are not, on the surface, horrific people. They present just like the Nassar case. When I wrote this report about Jerry Sandusky, I said there are thousands of other people like Jerry Sandusky right now in other schools across this country. And if we keep thinking that we can see them from afar, we would recognize them if we saw them or if we knew them. If we keep thinking that, we will continue to keep putting our kids and young people at risk. So I just want to make that point clear.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So he first gets discovered that we know of. I'm trying to look through the timeline.
In 1998. In 1998, there was a boy who Jerry took a liking to from Second Mile. He was his mom was taking care of him. He didn't have a dad. She put him in this program. Jerry took him to the gym to do some weight training. During the course of that weight training, as they're walking from the weight room to the wrestling room, Jerry says, "Hey, why don't I teach you some wrestling moves?" Jerry hugs the kid and basically kisses the top of his head and says, "I love you." This is what he said to the kid. And then they did some wrestling, and then later they went to the locker room, and Jerry says, "Come on, take a shower and change back into your stuff." And the kid reluctantly did. And when they walked into the shower, Jerry walked into the shower first. The kid walked in later, and he walked to the other end of the shower room. This is a gang shower, which is very common in athletic gyms. And so Jerry said, "No, I got this one over here next to me, warming up for you. It takes a long time for that one to warm up." So the kid came over there during the course of the shower. Jerry was throwing soap at him and soaping him up, and he picked him up. They're both naked. Jerry picked him up and gave him a bear hug and said, "I could squeeze your guts out," and put him back down. The kid, when he came home, kind of as a throwaway line to his mother as he was walking away, said, "Oh, by the way, if you're wondering why my hair is wet, I took a shower with Jerry Sandusky." Now, the mother knew her son well enough to know that he does those throwaway lines when he's concerned about something. So she gave him some time, went in and talked to him, and basically sat down and said, "What's up with Jerry Sandusky in the shower?" The kid said, "I don't know." And he told her about the hug and the kiss on the top of his head and the "I love you," and then the hug in the shower. And the mother was very upset. She went to a social worker friend of hers. The friend interviewed the child, and she wrote up a report. And in the report, she said, "These are red flag behaviors." She went to her boss with it. Her boss looked at it, said, "Jerry Sandusky, uh-oh." She worked for Bureau of Child Welfare there. And they had placed 30 kids with the Sandusky family. The boss said, we're conflicted out. We cannot do this investigation. We have to send it to the Department of, I think it's Department of Health for the state. And that boss, for whatever reason, decided that this report that she had was part of the conflict. He did not forward that report on to the Department of Health. So the Department of Health hired a psychologist, and if you were here in this room with us, you'd see me doing the inverted commas, quotes, because, in fact, it turns out he had not yet graduated, not yet had his degree. But this guy, Seasock, who held himself out as a psychologist, said he interviewed Sandusky, and he may have interviewed the boy, I'm not sure, but he determined Sandusky cannot be a pedophile. There was no sexual intent, and he made all these ridiculous statements, and I can't go into all the details now, but he made ridiculous statements that he stated as fact that are not fact at all, that he said, rule out Jerry Sandusky as a pedophile. So as a result of this, the district attorney, the Department of Health, Department of Child Welfare, and the Penn State Police Department all reported that there was no sexual intent, there was no crime here, Jerry was not a pedophile, because that is exactly what Stock had said. And they closed that case. But they did tell Jerry not to take any more kids into a shower because it looks wrong. And so that's what happened in 1998.
So I'm just reading the timeline here. So this timeline here says that the mom went to the university and the university police investigated and found no.
So,
well, I just told you it was way beyond. She didn't go to the university.
Mm-hmm.
She went to the Department of Child Welfare, and Child Welfare went to DOH and informed the university, and that's how they were brought in. The district attorney was also brought in. The district attorney declined prosecution, and they made a statement. The police detective that ran the case made a statement to Penn State and the administrators there that Jerry was not a pedophile, and Jerry was warned not to bring kids and shower with them on campus again.
And this is the one where Detective Schreffler was actually recording the mother with Sandusky.
And
yes, after she went to the psychologist,
mm-hmm.
she had the detective come to her house, hide, and record. She had Sandusky come over, and she recorded a conversation with him. And during the course of that conversation, Jerry said, "Oh, I feel so terrible. I want to die. I can't believe that I might have, made him uncomfortable. I mean, that certainly wasn't my intention. I never, ever intended to do anything like that." And again, as a result of that and the investigation that the psychologist did, everybody decided that Jerry Sandusky does not have a sexual interest in children, that he did not sexually molest this child, and therefore, and there was another one of his friends was in the same situation. That kid said another one of his friends had a shower with Jerry, and a similar thing happened to him. And in both of those cases, they said, it's not what it is a boundary issue. Jerry doesn't realize, these are not your kids. You can't be horsing around with them in the shower, period. That's what the professionals told the non-professionals.
In fact, most of my experiences came from being alone with Sandusky. Usually during a long car ride, it was pretty much a given. You got into the car, just like strapping on a seatbelt, his right hand went on my left thigh, and then it stayed there. And I lived about 25, 30 minutes from campus. So if we were going to any kind of an event in State College, it was, for me, it was kind of a long car ride to have, a grown man's hand on my thigh.
So, two things I want to ask you. Do you think that they were really, as you say, they were groomed themselves, they were
Yes.
fooled, or do you think they're looking the other way, they don't want to see it?
Of course, that was an allegation that was out there, so it's something I had to address. But there's absolutely no evidence of that. In fact, one of the things that Sue Paterno has said was, we let Jerry in the pool with our children. He was throwing the kids around. We would never have done that, meaning Joe and her, if they thought he was molesting them. we thought he was doing us a favor since he didn't drink. We could relax around the pool and drink and not worry about it. And he was taking care of our kids in the pool. So there's that. The fact is that celebrities and politicians gave millions of dollars every year to Second Mile. Jerry was very effective in fundraising because all these people really believed he was doing good. And so it's actually the people who are closest to effective groomers that actually believe the grooming the most. And from a distance, you can look and say, wait, a guy who spends all his time with kids and he's adopted and fostered all these kids and he's taking kids into a shower. Oh my God, he must be molesting them. But when you know the guy and he looks in your face and says, I don't do that. Are you kidding me? Come on. I'm a good person. I know there's bad people out there. I believe they were taken in, and I believe it based on what happened and how things were dealt with. I'm not going to assume a crime. I look for evidence of a crime. And there was, in the Freeh report, an assumption of a conspiracy to hide this stuff and to help Jerry get away with his crimes when there's absolutely no evidence to support it. And I know that for a fact because, in fact, those charges were dismissed in all the cases in which they were brought.
So Jerry is allowed to continue. He finally retires, but he
retires the next year.
He retains privileges that he can use the athletic facilities. He can bring kids in.
Well, he can bring kids in. I don't know if that was actually something that he negotiated because he was still running the Second Mile. I mean, he wasn't running it. He was the main fundraiser for the Second Mile. And they would do events at the school. There would also be sort of football clinics over the summers and things like that. Anyway, he did ask for, as part of his retirement, to maintain his access, which is not unusual for people who are retired out of the school. Yeah. So he did actually maintain that. And then in 2001, there was another incident.
Before we get to in 2000, he publishes an autobiography that is called
Touched.
The Fucking Monster.
I don't disagree with you at all, but we call that leakage.
Yeah.
It's somebody who can't help himself but to leak out information.
Hiding in plain sight, he's so just
exactly. But because he was so open about, his love for children and all the amazing things that he did for kids and how they gave him energy in life. He famously said, he adopted 5 boys and 1 girl for Sergeant. Sergeant is how he lovingly referred to his wife. I know it's a little bit crazy, but he adopted 5 boys for him and 1 girl for her.
Does he have natural born children? Or
no, he doesn't. I don't know why. I have a theory why, but I don't know why. I mean, it could be medical. It could be just because they decided not to have any. So yes, he published a book called Touched, which would later become an incredible investigative resource because the police went through that book and saw all the kids that he was depicted with and went and talked to them whether or not they were victimized by him when this whole thing broke.
So in 2000, a janitor sees Sandusky in the shower performing oral sex on a young boy who later is identified as victim 8. And this janitor tells the coworkers and his supervisor, but it does not get escalated.
He tells a coworker that he saw this happen. He said he was horrified. It was the worst thing. He was at war and the worst thing he'd ever seen in his life. But because he personally didn't want to risk losing his job, and he thought he might lose his job if he did this. He did not report it at the time, and it was a friend of the coworker who later reported it to the supervisor. It was not done at the time, and it was completely hidden at the time. So he just held it to himself. This was an opportunity for that man to save a child from sexual victimization and save a bunch of other victims, and that man did not do it. Yet, Louis Freeh actually stood up for this guy, and this was what incensed me when I first read his report. He said he didn't do it because he feared losing his job, so it was justified, and that's bullshit. I don't know why Louis did that other than to promote what he was going to say later, which was that Joe didn't do more. Basically, he somehow twists this into its justification. But now let's look at the details of that janitor. That janitor was a temporary employee. A janitor didn't work there for years, didn't know the culture there, didn't know what was right or wrong in that school, but he knew that this kid was being sexually victimized and he let it happen, and then he walked away.
Yeah, that's how little children mean to
I know.
our society. I mean, it's just...
Well, wait till we get to McQuarrie.
Yeah.
Okay? Yeah, so anyway, that infuriated me, and I could not understand that. How Louis Freeh could just take that justification that he could have lost his job when, A, he was a temporary employee, so he wouldn't know what the culture was, and he didn't rely on that school as the only place he could ever work. So it's absurd, wrong, and anybody who balances the sexual assault of a child against their employment, I'm sorry, that's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Risk your job, save a kid. All right, Mike McQuarrie is at this time, a graduate assistant, not even a coach, really. But he's there, it's late at night, 9 o'clock at night or 9 something at night, and he goes into the coach's locker room. He's going to drop off a pair of sneakers. There's 2 doors 10 feet apart, separated by a vestibule going into this locker room. When he opens the first door and walks in, before he gets to the second door, he hears a shower running and he hears a slapping noise that in his mind he immediately recognized as sex. He thought one of his fellow coaches was in there with a woman having sex. So he walked in, he went to his locker, and he turned to look over his shoulder in the mirror because the image would bounce off and be able to look into the shower. And he looked, and he didn't see what he expected to find, which was a guy having sex with a girl. He saw Sandusky behind a boy who he said was 10 or 12 years old. And he said, in his mind, he literally said this, "Break it up, please."
In his mind.
That's what he said. He said in his mind. And he slammed his locker door so that they would know somebody was there. But he said, "Break it up, please." Does that sound like somebody who's witnessing a child being raped, which is what he later said? So, I mean, what I'm saying is, break it up, please, sounds like something where he doesn't want to see gay sex in his locker room, and so he's telling them to break it up, as opposed to, oh my God, that guy is sexually assaulting a child. I need to go rescue that child. No, what did he do? He left. But the next time when he got confronted about why did he just leave, he said, no, I slammed my locker. And then the next time he said, well, I actually went up and looked in, and they both looked at me, and neither of them said anything. As if he expected this child to outcry right then.
Yeah.
Doesn't say he has a great understanding of what sexual victimization is, but just the fact that the child wouldn't outcry, if you actually thought that he was being sexually assaulted, raped, anally penetrated, that you wouldn't do something to stop it. And then he walked away.
Are you saying that in reality, what he saw was consensual sex? Are you saying that that's really what he saw, that he thought he saw?
I think that's how he saw it at the time. Otherwise, he would have gone in and rescued the kid. If it was a 10 or 12-year-old girl standing in front of a 57-year-old man or a 55-year-old man who was engaging in anal sex
How
with a
could
girl.
he think it's consensual? I know. I'm not yelling at you. I'm yelling at the world.
Of course. But I also had a theory at the time, which I didn't put in my report because I didn't want to out him as a potential victim. I said that it is possible that this was a triggering event for him, that his mind was overwhelmed and he just shut down and had to get out of there. Later, he would, many years later, after this was about to come out, he would have a conversation with some of the kids that he coached, some of the young men that he coached on the team, and some of those young men came forward and said that he told them that he was sexually victimized as a kid. So I think that possibly is what happened. Two things. That means two things. One, that it was a traumatic event for him, and two, he may have superimposed things from his own experience onto that experience, because what he did when he left that locker room, when he left that 12-year-old boy alone with a 57-year-old man who he says now that he thought he was sexually anally penetrating this child. He says that he went upstairs, sat in his office for a minute, called his dad, told his dad generally what happened. Dad said, come home. When he got there, father had also called his neighbor, also his boss, who's also a physician. His boss, Dr. Drainoff, asked him a series of questions. Okay, did you see where Jerry Sandusky's hands were? No. Did you see any penises? No. Did you see any erections? No. Did you see any insertions? No. I know, but he asked all these questions, and he said, what did you see? It was way over the line. That's what he said. And that's all he said. And so the doctor said, well, there's nothing that you saw that's a crime or that's reportable, but I think you should tell your boss about it. So the next day, not that night, not immediately, the next morning, he called Joe Paterno, went over to talk to him, and he had a conversation with Joe Paterno. During that conversation, Paterno said to him, you're really uncomfortable trying to talk to me about this. Jerry retired. I don't have anything to do with him anymore, but I'll put you in touch with two people. The head of the athletic department, who still contacts him, has talks with him or deals with him.
Tim Curley.
And Schultz, who happens to be the head of the campus police department. So he calls them and tells them to talk to McQueary, and they set up a meeting. They wait days. It was at the end of the week or the beginning of the next week that they actually talked to him. But they came away from the meeting, and their report of that meeting was that McQueary told them that Sandusky was showering with this boy and that it was way over the line. They made notes, or their statements after that were that they understood that he was saying Sandusky was horsing around in the shower again with a boy.
Again?
Again, yes, they knew. What do you mean?
No, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. How did they know? How did they know that this is not the first time?
Well, we just discussed in 1998, there was an allegation.
But that came to their attention? They knew. Okay.
Yeah, the police department investigated it and dismissed the case. The district attorney investigated and dismissed the case. The Department of Health and Department of Child Welfare, the Child Welfare recused themselves, but they joined in the result. The Department of Health investigated and said there was no sexual intent,
right?
That he had a boundary line that he crossed. He had poor boundaries, personal boundaries, and he was horsing around with a kid in the shower, and he shouldn't have. And they told him not to again. And so when in 2001 this came back to the attention of the guys, they thought he's horsing around in the shower again. We told him not to do that. We got to do something. This is a problem. And they eventually approach him, and they approach the Second Mile, and they tell them what happened. And they said, we don't want you bringing kids in the shower ever again.
Why isn't this a mandatory report?
Because a mandatory
to regular police.
Okay. Well, mandatory reports are done by mandatory reporters. And neither of those people were mandatory reporters. Why? Because they don't work with children. They're not trained. They have no responsibility for it because they have no connection to children. In theory. In fact, because schools, years before this, found out that, hey, our campus is sitting here empty over the summer. There's kids' camps over the summer. We could actually rent out rooms and the facilities and make money for the school over the summer. So they actually did bring hundreds of kids on campus. So they, in a way, over the summer, not when school was in session, but mainly over the summer, they became a youth-serving organization. So they should have made them mandatory reporters, but with that, they should have trained them. But none of that had happened. Being done now, but it didn't happen back then. So that's why it wasn't mandatory reporting.
Okay, so they tell Second Mile Charity?
Yeah, they tell the director of Second Mile, who, by the way, is a mandated reporter. If he comes into information about the sexual victimization of a child, he is a mandated reporter. Well, what they told him was that McQueary told them, this is how they reported it to him. This is the report of how they reported it, is that Sandusky was horsing around with the kid in the shower again. We told him in 1998 not to do that anymore. We don't want to bring in any more kids into our building. Stop that and deal with it. And we're going to sit down with him and tell him that.
So they didn't say sex. It was just horsing around.
Yes, exactly. And there's the problem. Because when McQuarrie told Paterno, he said, I never used the word sex. I never used sexual terms. I never said penis. I never said anal. I never said anal rape. I never said penetration, anything like that, because you don't talk like that to Coach Paterno. You don't talk like that to Coach Paterno. Coach Paterno was such a prude. He wouldn't allow football players, which notoriously are very locker roomy. Okay, let me just put it that way.
In air quotes.
Yes. He wouldn't allow them to use the word fart. Okay.
I hate that word.
I know, I don't like it, and I don't like the fact that I just said it. But the fact is, that was a word that he didn't use. So you have to take that into account when you understand why McQuarrie would not say things like that to him. But at the same time, McQuarrie may have thought he conveyed something more to Joe than he actually did. And so the guy, Joe Paterno, and we'll talk to Scott about this, when Joe later found out what the allegations were that McQuarrie said happened in his third or fourth version of what happened, Joe did not even know what the words meant.
Yeah, that's a funny part, not a funny part, but a very ironic part in the HBO film where he says, what is sodomy? I mean,
but he actually asked his son to tell him what he meant. So you'll see when we talk to Scott, we'll ask him about that, what really happened, as opposed to what was depicted on the film, if it was the same or different. So that case ended there. Let me tell you what the wrench in that system is, though. There were 3 emails that Schultz, I believe, saved. And those emails were between Schultz and Curley and Spanier, I believe. Spanier, who was traveling, and Schultz and Curley, I don't know if they were traveling too. President of the university at the time. And those emails, although they mention Coach or Joe, they're not sent to Joe Paterno. He did not use email. He personally did not engage in email traffic, and there's no indication that he actually got any of these emails. But in these emails, they made reference to the fact that they wanted to talk to Second Mile and to Jerry Sandusky, and if Jerry didn't admit that he had a problem and get help for it, that they would go to DHS, who investigates this kind of thing. And so that was the plan, and they went to Second Mile first, I believe, and then the Second Mile guy had a talk with Jerry. I believe they had a talk with Jerry as well, and Jerry said he's sorry, he didn't realize that it would look that bad, and of course nothing happened.
But how fucked up is this, that they go to the predator? They go to the predator, and it's like,
because it is fucked up when you know the facts, but in reality, they didn't know he was a predator. And that's why I don't like to call him a predator, because you call him a predator and everybody thinks they know what a predator is. Jerry's an incredibly nice guy. He's a wonderful person. The taxpayer, he's religious. He pays his, he doesn't drink. He does amazing things for the community and children that are hurting. I'm telling you what.
He's a predator.
No, he's not a predator. A predator is somebody like a lion or tiger or bear that is known to prey on and kill and violent and all that stuff. He is a nice guy, acquaintance offender. It's a very different thing than a predator. Yes, preys on children, but he doesn't do it in a predatory manner. Look it up. Well, let's look it up.
So at this point in our conversation, Jim and I really did stop to look up the word predator. And you'll have to tune in next week to hear what we found out and what other tough issues Jim and I get into on part 2 of our conversation about the terrible aftermath of the child sex abuse cases at Penn State University. If any aspects of our episode today has triggered you or someone you know may need help to stop the sexual abuse of children, please go to stopitnow.org to get answers, help, and guidance. Thanks for listening to Real Crime Profile. See you next time.
If you like our podcasts, there are a few things you can do. You can take 2 minutes and go to Apple Podcasts and leave a 5-star review. You can also check out all Real Crime Profile offers and promotions and our sponsors in our show notes. Another thing you can do is go to Facebook and like our Facebook page, and you can also follow us on Twitter at Real Crime Profile without the E. And one last thing, please tell your friends, family and colleagues about us and spread the Real Crime Profile word. Thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate all of our listeners.
Real Crime Profile is produced and edited by Paul Francis Sullivan. Sound engineering by Mike Thal. Music is composed by Simba Tsumba. Logo art by Jim Clementi. Real Crime Profile is produced by XG Productions and distributed by Wondery.
For advice and support if you're experiencing stalking in the UK, you can contact Paladin National Stalking Advocacy Service on 0203 866 4107, or you can go to the website where there's a lot of information and advice that you can follow on www.paladinservice.co.uk. If you're experiencing domestic abuse, you can call the National Domestic Violence Helpline for free on 0800 2000 247. In the US, if you're experiencing domestic abuse and need advice, shelter or counselling, you can call Genesis, the 24-hour hotline, on 214-946-4357. You can also go to their website for further advice or support, www.genesisshelter.org. And there's the domestic violence hotline on 800 799 7233.